Hello, everyone. Hello. Good morning. Good to see you. Let's open up our Bibles to the book of Joshua, shall we? We're in the book of Joshua. It's after Deuteronomy, before the book of Judges. We are in chapter number 10. Chapter number 10. Okay, so what we're seeing, just trying to catch us up, what we're seeing is Joshua is leading Israel on the southern campaign. All right, they're trying to take southern Canaan, and we're going to see here they're going to have a southern campaign and a northern campaign, and in chapter 9, the Canaanites, different kingdoms, different peoples, kind of were banding together, right? And they're saying, all right, we got to put a stop to Joshua and the Israelites. And there was one particular group of cities by one name. Does anyone remember what the name was? Okay, it was Gibeon. And so the Gibeonites decided, you know what, we're not going to really go fight against Joshua. We're going to pretend we're somebody else and try to get on their side, basically. And they do, and they get accepted. And in chapter number 10, they were fighting. Gibeon was fighting against the other Canaanites because the other Canaanites said, not cool that you did that. You shouldn't have done that. We need to make an example out of you so no other of our cities do the same thing. So they attack Gibeon. Well, Gibeon's now technically on Israel's side, so Israel comes to their aid, and that's what we're reading about in chapter number 10. Joshua was basically mopping the floor with these Canaanites, and we got a couple of miracles taking place, starting in chapter 10, verse number 11. What was the first miracle? So Joshua had the people on the run, and he's chasing down the Canaanites, and then a miracle happens. The first one, which was what? Something came down from the sky. Okay, hailstones. And then the second miracle, we're pretty sure it's a miracle. The sun and the moon stood still. Okay. And then let's see, where are we at? Let's see, chapter number 10, and so verse 13 here. So verse 13 is the second miracle. It says, so the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? That's what and I'm going to just say a little something about the book of Jasher. Now, I don't remember exactly what all I said about it last time, but it means straight. So the book of the straight, or the book of the upright, is actually called the book of the righteous. So this is an actual book that existed. 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse number 18, we see David pulling from this same book, and he pulls a song of sorts out of it that he wanted the people to learn. So this is not just a one-off thing. The book of Jasher is mentioned somewhere else. David knew of it, and it seems to be a book of songs, a book of poems and things like that, because verse number 12 and 13 are in a more poetic, they're written more in Hebrew poetry. And so when you see at the end of verse 12, it says, sun, stand still over Gibeon, moon in the valley of Ajalon. All of that is very poetic, and it's pulled from this collection of poems, or this collection of songs in this book of Jasher. Now, there are two modern books of similar name. You have something called Pseudo Jasher, and you have another one that is called that name that you see up there. Sefer Ha-Yashar, maybe. That sounds pretty Hebrew. So if you get a hold of one of these, it's gonna say this is the book of Jasher. These are probably not the book. Generally, now there's gonna be people who believe, oh, this is the book that was way back then, and so we're gonna find people who are obviously gonna always say these books should be in the Bible, these are divine, these are the real deal kind of thing. But generally, it's believed that what we have today that would be called the book of Jasher is not the actual book of Jasher. Okay, does that make sense? This book is lost to history. And that's it. So when you're reading something about the book of Jasher, you just kind of take it. I mean, I would study a little bit more past, if you really want to know, I'd study a little bit more past whatever author is saying, hey, this is the book of Jasher, then maybe do a little more research into it and see what you think. But it's probably not going to be this book right here. All right, now it's not unusual. So when we see stuff like this, we're like, oh, the book of Jasher and a biblical character is mentioning it, that means it should have been in the Old Testament. And this happens a lot for the New Testament, where people think there's all these lost books and all of these lost gospels and all of this stuff, and it's just not true. These other books exist, but they don't bear the marks of inspiration. You have the pseudepigrapha books, you've got and then you've got the apocryphal books. All of those do not bear the mark of inspiration. A lot of them contradict the actual books that we have in the canon, in the Bible canon. And so don't give any weight to the fact that there might be some other books that we're missing. There's some other knowledge out there that we just don't have. That's not true. That's not true. So it's not unusual just because a book in the Bible, or a character in the Bible, or a writer of the author of one of the books of the Bible mentions another book that we don't have, doesn't mean that book is automatically from heaven. Doesn't mean it's inspired. What it means is an inspired writer used that book. And that's a big difference. That's a big difference. So just so you can see all the different kind of books, I wanted to get this list to you that are mentioned that we don't have in the canon. You have in Numbers 21, it's called the Book of the Wars of the Lord. What is that book? Mm-hmm. 1 Kings 11, you have the books of the Acts of Solomon. 1 Chronicles 29, the book of Nathan, the prophet. Then you have the book of Gad, the seer. You have the prophet of Ahijah, and then you have the visions of Iddo, and then you have the book of Shemaiah, the book of Jehu. When you read in the book of Esther, towards the end of the book, you read about the recording of the holiday or the celebration Purim. Have y'all ever heard of Purim other than the Bible? Purim. Never heard of it? Okay, well, that comes from Esther, and it's a thing that's celebrated today. It says that it's written in the book. The mentions of the recording of Purim are in the book. Well, Purim is nowhere else written in the Bible, so I'm thinking that's another book that this is written in that we don't have access to, or we don't have it in the canon of the Bible. So that's another book that was mentioned. Esther 10 also mentions the Chronicles of the Kings of Media and Persia. Then when you get over to the New Testament, Paul, then you might remember this, I was quoting something in a Wednesday night. I used some newspaper clipping or something, and somebody got a little upset at us, didn't they, online, because I should have been quoting the Bible only. Something like that, right? But when you go to Acts 17, Paul quotes a Hellenist poet. He quotes a Greek poet. Now, when he quotes that, he uses that, since it's one of your poets, also says that we are his offspring. Acts 17:28. And if that doesn't mean that Paul is saying that Greek poet, all his writings should have been in the Bible. He's not saying that that's inspired. And I was using, I don't know what it was. I don't remember how long ago this was. But I was using a secular story to make a point, make a biblical point. And really, that's what Paul does. I mean, I know I'm not an apostle, but I think that, there's some precedent set for doing that. I don't know why the sweet lady got so upset at us, but and then Paul also quotes a prophet. So a poet might be one thing, right? But he quotes a prophet, a Cretan prophet in the book of Titus, chapter number 1 and verse 12. And so he's pulling from other extra biblical writings to make a point. And then you have the last one, Jude mentions the book of Enoch. Jude seems to quote from the book of Enoch. Ooh, well, what's that book about? You know what? I mean, it might be an interesting read, but as far as my salvation concerns and what I have in the Bible, I don't really care what the book of Enoch says. I think it's a real thing, and Jude probably pulled from it, and he's allowed to do that because he's inspired God to write what he did. Okay, so just with this humongous list, I just want to throw that out there to you. And it's not an odd thing that another book is mentioned and pulled from. I really just don't know. We should really not think too much of it past that. Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't go read these books. I mean, I think reading anything and everything is that's how you gain knowledge and gain a lot of wisdom that way. But obviously you want to take things with a grain of salt and not swallow everything as truth. And so, you can read whatever you want, just do it with some caution and a little bit of Christian wisdom. Okay, so the fact that, remember we had this big deal about, this big conversation about, did Joshua sin, right? So the Gibeonites came to Joshua, they lied to him. Joshua says, okay, he believes the lie, and he takes them in when he should not have taken them in. And then come to find out, Joshua finds out they lied, and then everything just kind of kept on going as smooth. No one got killed, everything. And so, did Joshua mess up? Should he have kicked them out of Israel, so to speak, which would have been killing them? But the fact that in chapter number 10, Gibeon gets attacked, God sends Joshua to save them, fight for them. I mean, doesn't that let us know that God was not angry at Joshua? He was not displeased that Gibeon is now on Israel's side, right? Because God has basically protected these Gibeonites, didn't he? He did. Okay. Any questions about that? I scanned the audience and there's no questions. Okay, let's read 16 through chapter number 10, Joshua 16 through 21. All right, so they decimated the army, and the kings of these armies are on the run. But verse 16, but these 5 kings had fled and hidden themselves in a cave at Makkedah. Then it was told Joshua, saying, the 5 kings had been found hidden at the cave of Makkedah. So Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them. And do not stay there yourselves, but pursue your enemies and attack their rear guard. Do not allow them to enter their cities, for the Lord your God has delivered them into your hand. Then it happened, while Joshua and the children of Israel made an end of slaying them with a very great slaughter, till they had finished, that those who escaped entered fortified cities. And all the people returned to the camp to Joshua at Makkedah in peace. All right, so really not much to explain here. They trapped the 5 kings in a cave. Would have been a very, very big cave, very deep cave, because you have to imagine that if someone's rolling stones at the mouth of a tiny little cave, and you're inside of it, you're probably going to be trying to get out. This is probably a very deep cave, and the kings were way back in there. Okay, 22 through 24, it says. Well, let's see. Oh, I didn't finish reading 21, did I? It says, no one moved his tongue against any of the children of Israel. So there's some fear being struck in the hearts of the enemy. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring out those 5 kings to me from the cave. And they did so and brought out those 5 kings to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And so it was when they brought out those kings to Joshua that Joshua called for all the men of Israel and said to the captains of the men of war who were with them, "Come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings." And they drew near and put their feet on their necks. Okay, so that sounds kind of awful, but this was a thing that was done. I don't know how well you can see this picture up here, but putting one's foot on the neck of an enemy, a captured enemy, that was like a symbolic gesture of victory. This is just something that all the cultures did back then, and the Hebrews did it as well. And this is seen in reliefs that have been discovered in archaeological digs and whatnot. And this is the Assyrians. The Assyrians did this as well. And so you would think, well, why is Joshua imitating these heathen practices, you know? I mean, I don't know if this is such an evil thing. This is just something, this is wartime, and this is just what they did. I don't know. I don't think there's too much to look into it. In fact, does this idea of putting the foot on the neck or putting a foot on the head of an enemy, does that remind you of anything at all that you read in the Bible?
Jesus crushing the head of the serpent.
Okay, so in Genesis 3:15, there's a prophecy about Christ, and it said that he's going to crush the head of the serpent. Do you think maybe this is that somewhat related to this particular practice right here, where Jesus is going to be the victor, and he's going to put his head on the neck or the head of Satan when he crushes him? It's possible. It's possible. I'm not saying it is. It's possible. Can you think of anything else?
Could be a mockery to them.
Okay, mocking them. Yeah. Humiliating them, I guess.
I mean, it seems terrible, but I mean, we see examples of God's people being approved of mocking their ways.
Yeah, yeah. What about this? Psalm 110, which is a very, very well-known psalm. So it's all over Hebrews. It says, "The Lord said to my Lord," does this sound familiar? "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool." Now, what imagery does that bring to your mind? Sounds like something like that. Sounds like something like that, doesn't it? 1 Corinthians 15, verse 25, "For he must reign, Christ must reign, till he has put all his enemies under his feet." Romans 16, verse 20, Paul writes, "And the God of peace will crush Satan under your feet shortly." I think we're seeing this kind of thing, where to go? That kind of thing right there. And I think even Genesis 3:15 may possibly, but so it's not an odd thing, is it? That is the idea that first century Christians were familiar with when Paul was writing what he did, and when the psalmist wrote that in Psalm 110, they were familiar with that, and so the message was clear, and the message should be clear to us as well. And so we note that Joshua didn't put his feet on the neck. Joshua didn't put his feet on there, right? It wasn't Joshua. Okay, he called the captains. Now, why do you think he did that? Why didn't he just do it? He is the leader. He's supposed to be showing dominance, right? I mean, and maybe this was like a mark of honor or something, like you get to put the foot on the neck or something like that. Why did he call somebody else to do that, do you think?
The captains were the victors at each place. They're the ones that commanded their men.
Yeah, probably did more of the fighting, more of the chasing after, maybe.
You know, Josh was like the general. He sits back, he watches, and tells them what to do. Then they do it, and it may have been something out of respect to them saying, "You captured these people, I'm gonna let you do this."
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
But later, when you read on down there further, it tells you what Joshua did.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think Joshua's not so much out to make a name for himself, right? He could have been this kind of general, this kind of leader to really just take all of the glory for himself and really not, really exalt himself above his captains and above the people, which he already was. I mean, he had a one-way line, direct line with God, which no one else had. But he wasn't that kind of man, not out to make a name for himself. Certainly up for sharing the glory of this. Okay. Let's see, 25 through 28 says, then Joshua said to them, do not be afraid nor be dismayed. Be strong and of good courage. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? For thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And afterward Joshua struck them and killed them, hanged them on 5 trees, and they were hanging on the trees until evening. And so it was at the time of the going down of the sun that Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees, cast them into the cave where they had been hidden, laid large stones against the cave's mouth, which remain until this very day. Sounds like another memorial of sorts was erected there with these stones at the front of the cave. Interesting. All right. 29, let's see. Well, 28. 28 through, well, you know what? I really don't want to. Let's see. Let me read 28. On that day, Joshua took Makkedah, struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them, all the people who were in it. He let none remain. He also did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho, probably to the king of Ai as well. Now, just understand that when he says, and he let none of them remain, we don't read it in that tone, because it's like he's some cruel, just relentless, pursuer. This is what he's commanded to do. God said, you cannot let any of them remain. You're not supposed to let, especially their leaders, because of what they would potentially do to Israel if they were allowed to remain. Yes, sir.
Just a quick thing about the whole putting the foot on their heads and then Joshua killing them. To me, it's almost symbolic of Christ and the Father. The prophecy is of Christ putting his feet on his enemies. And so the chiefs of the men of war, in a sense, to me, are almost as the son, and which is Christ, and then Joshua being, in a sense, the father who exacts the actual punishment on them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. The last, so I'm not going to read through 29 through 43. Hold your applause. This is basically, so 29 through 43 is the finishing of the southern campaign. All right, they're going to take over the land. Now, what happens is Joshua defeats the Canaanites. That's the commentary on the rest of this chapter. He goes through 7 cities or 7 areas. 4 kings are killed, or 4 kings are killed. 10 kings in all that we've just read about. If you include the 5 in the cave and the one at Makkedah, you got 10 kings in all. And as you read through here, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought that king was killed over here and that king was good. When a king dies, what happens? Let's see, what happens to the throne? What happens to the kingdom or whatever? Okay, he gets replaced. And so if you read repeats, like let's say the king of Hebron, I thought he was killed in the cave, but then Joshua has to go and kill him again. What happened? Was he resurrected, or the Bible messed up, or what? That was his successor, right? So there's no big deal in any repeats of the death of any kings. All right. And I would say that the rest of all these people that are mentioned at the end of chapter 10 represented the nations in chapter number 9. They all came together and said, we're going to put a stop to Israel. Enough of this. And that didn't work out too well for them. Okay. Now, chapter number 11 is the northern campaign. All right, so they're done with the south. They've subdued it for the most part, and now they're going to take care of the northern part of it. All right, this is basically a repeat of chapter 9 and chapter 10, just in the northern part of the land. All right, let's read. Let's read 1 through 5, shall we? It says, and it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Nadon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings who were from the north in the mountains, in the plain of Kinneroth, in the lowland, and in the heights of Dor on the west, the Canaanites in the east and in the west, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and the Hivite below Hermon in the land of Mizpah. So they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore, in multitude, with very many horses and chariots. And when all these kings had met together, they came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. You see how it sounds a lot like what just happened in the southern part, okay? Now, verse number 4 lets us know that the enemy was way, way bigger than Israel. We don't hear about Israel being described like this. Now, there's some prophecies about Abraham's descendants and whatnot, that's in a whole other context, and it means something different. A lot of times in the Bible, you read of the enemy being described just like this. And so we don't have to really put a number on it, but we can know that it's a lot. It is a lot. It's a lot. And the mention that they have many horses and chariots probably indicates that the northern part of Canaan was maybe a little more, I don't want to say sophisticated. They were just a little more along. They were a little more along than the south was. Less barbaric, maybe. It seemed like because we don't read anything about the southern people having chariots and things like that. I don't think we do. So they were a little more advanced, okay, than the southern part. Maybe that's why they took the southern part first to begin with. I don't know. That's just speculation. Okay. Verse 6 through 9 says, but the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, because for tomorrow, about this time, I will deliver all of them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom, and they attacked them. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to greater Sidon, or you see Great Sidon, to the brook Mizraphoth, to the valley of Mizpah eastward. They attacked them until they left none of them remaining. So Joshua did to them as the Lord had told them. He hamstrung their horses, burned their chariots with fire. All right, so there you go, a defeat. He's describing how they defeated them. Great Sidon, understand, so they chased them that far north. And if you were to look where Sidon is on your Bible map or something, you see it's way up on the Mediterranean coast, way north. So this is the sister city of Tyre, and it's called Great Sidon because at one point Sidon was the greater city than Tyre, her sister city. You might remember reading in the book of Isaiah, chapter number 23, that Tyre was the big city. Remember talking about Isaiah saying, "Oh, you send out your ships and you're doing all of this wonderful thing. You think you got it made, but God's going to bring judgment upon you." Now Isaiah is way past this time period, right? So as time went on, Tyre became bigger, but here Sidon is the big boy up there. But just know that they chased them out of Canaan. They're out of the promised land. That's a way up there. And it's an indicator of complete and total victory. This is why it's even said this. Not just giving us an actual really detailed this. Okay, they chased them exactly this many miles to this particular city on this particular. It's really to tell us that they got them out of the land, complete and total victory. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
I think you mentioned about in verse 4 there that the people were even as the sand in the sea. The
Mm.
great army they had, and horses and chariots and all. But then in verse 6, I think it was, says, and I don't know whether this is literal at this time, but by this time tomorrow, they were done. So I don't know whether that was a 24-hour period or whatever, but this great army was defeated in one day.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah.
Also, of course, we see that utterly destroy them, but this was a land that was going to be divided among the 12 tribes.
Right.
So you can see part of why they had to be utterly destroyed and cast out of the children of Israel. They were going to inherit this land.
Yeah.
So that would mean that, of course, there were ongoing conflicts, but these people who were in the rule and the kings and all were utterly destroyed, cast out, and the children of Israel had that land.
Right, yeah.
According to the promise of Abraham.
Yeah, God was going to see to it that. And there's one big reason why God was not allowing the heathen Canaanites to stay among Israel. Israel's going to take it regardless. What was the biggest reason? Did God just, now we know we've determined already in class that God was punishing them. This was really judgment for their sins. They've been going on for centuries, all right? But there's another big reason why God wanted them out. And only Israelites, only the Hebrew people there. Why? Because of the other gods. Because of the influence that they were going to have. And that's a big deal. And we're going to see, obviously, we already know this. Most of us know the story. They didn't do what they should have done. And which is why you read about all the bad things happening in 1st and 2nd, especially 2nd Kings. Okay. Oh, yes, sir.
What's the significance of hamstrung horses?
I would imagine that it is so that they cannot be used anymore. Make them useless.
So they would have severed their hamstring.
That's what it sounds like to me. Unless that's another word for killing them, somehow killing them. I mean, it sounds like you sever a.
You can't walk.
And if a horse can't walk, he's pretty much dead, right? Like he's gonna die, right?
Depends on where they cut the hamstring.
Okay.
A lot of times they could still be used for farming.
So.
Not for galloping or war.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. You said you looked at.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's so no one could use them again, and unless God was going to allow them to use the horses for some work or whatever, some other less burdensome work for the horses. But God, I think what we're seeing is just doesn't want any other enemy getting these horses or having the people who were fleeing and running away taking the horses and using them again. It's really handicapping the enemy.
It says severely restrict the efficiency and effectiveness of. We were hamstrung by a total lack of knowledge. So,
Okay, yeah.
You know, and it's sitting in an oven crippled.
Yeah, they crippled them basically.
People that way too.
Okay.
Personally or animals by cutting their hamstring.
Yeah. Well,
Seem like why not just dispose of it? But what you said about couldn't be used for war.
yeah. It does, makes a lot of sense. Makes sense. All right. Let's read 10 through 15 now. That's it. So he hamstrung their horses, burned the chariots with fire. And now understand, these would have been iron chariots, like plated with iron, not like full. It would have been wood, plated with iron. Okay, anyways. Verse number 10. Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor, struck its king with the sword. For Hazor was formerly the head of all those kingdoms. Aha. And they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. Then he burned Hazor with fire. So all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded him. But as for the cities that stood on their mounds, or I think the King James says, still in their strength, I'll come back to that, Israel burned none of them, except Hazor only, which Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the livestock, the children of Israel took as booty for themselves, but they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they left none breathing, as the Lord had commanded Moses the servant. So Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. And I like that chain of authority there. And he left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. All right, so that's this on their mounds, these cities, they just left those, are still in their strength. These were probably cities way up high on the mountain somewhere, way up where it's like almost wasn't worth attacking at this time. Not necessary to attack. What Joshua was to do was to get rid of the main threats that in Canaan. Get rid of the big kings. Get rid of the main fortified cities, the military installations, I guess we might say. And then what was supposed to happen was the 12 tribes, once they got into their land, they had their own armies. Every tribe had their own army. They were supposed to go in and kind of clean up a little bit. They're supposed to clean house. There's a verse in Deuteronomy, I think I'll eventually get to it, I can't recall it, but he says that you're going to take, the prophecy was sort of a prophecy. They were going to take Canaan little by little. So it wasn't going to be like a big swoop kind of thing, which it sounds like this is what this is. There was a couple of swoops, and then there was a couple of sweeps, okay? And there's one big swoop to the bottom, one big swoop to the top, and then the tribes are going to come in and just sweep everything up and take care of business, right? Okay. So all these cities that were up there that really wasn't worth their time right now, it wasn't really a threat, there was no kings, they left it. Let's see, 16 through 20. I really want to try to get through the thing here, the chapter. Thus Joshua took all this land, the mountain country, all the south, all the land of Goshen, the lowland, and the Jordan plain, the mountains of Israel and its lowlands, from Mount Halak and the ascent to Seir, even as far as Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. This is all very north. This is very north. Mount Lebanon is northeast. And their kings and struck them down and killed them. Joshua made war a long time with those kings. Now, this is probably only about 7 years. The 7 years of war is a long time. And the way we figured out is 7 years is because we know Caleb's age in chapter number 14. And I'm not going to do the math, but that's how we know. It was about, let's just say 6 to 9 years. How about that? That's a long time with all those kings. 19, there was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon, all right, and we read about those. All the others they took in battle, for it was of the heart of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might utterly destroy them, and that they might receive no mercy, that he might destroy them as the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay. Now, this hardening of the hearts is no different than how God hardened Pharaoh's heart, all right? And I had a big old long sermon. It was like 3 hours long. You guys remember that? Like 4 hours long about hardening the hearts. And when you want to get a good idea of what it means, God hardening the heart, you need to read the account in Exodus, Pharaoh, and you can start at about chapter number 8, where it says, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. The magicians hardened his heart, and then the Lord hardened his heart. And when we understand all of those, we read all of that, and we can understand how God hardens people's hearts. How he hardened Pharaoh's heart was by sending the plagues, and Pharaoh kept saying, no, not gonna let go, and he's hardened his heart. And in that sense, God did it. And here, it would have been the same way, okay?
So there was no way of any of these future battles of them not trying to fight them. I mean, that wasn't clear to explain. Hearing, news would go out to all these other places.
Yeah.
That the Israelites are killing everybody.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they try to not engage, but if God's hardening their hearts, we're going to defeat them.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. It's the actions that Israel was taking was hardening their hearts as well. And we might even go back hundreds and hundreds of years. All the opportunity that God gave these people to turn around and come back to Him and repent as well, like He was given to Pharaoh. He gave Pharaoh how many times to repent? But yeah, you're right. Instead of saying leaving, like, oh, we know what they're going to do. They're going to kill us. We probably should we should go. And remember, these people are evil. These are not just happy-go-lucky people. They're just like, oh, that would give you, their shirt off their back kind of thing. These are evil people, heathen people with evil, wicked practices. And they should have left. Instead, they put their foot down and they dug in and they hardened their hearts and said, we can take it. And they lost. The last couple verses, we're out of time. The last couple verses are about the Anakim. And so I'll say a little bit about those. Those are the giants. We'll say something about those when we get back next week, and then we'll get into chapter 12. And let me tell you, from chapter 12 on until we get into the 20s, we're going to be flying through it because, well, just read it, and you'll see why. You don't want to go through me pronouncing all of that stuff. But we'll make sure we know what's going on. I'm not just going to completely ignore those chapters. We're going to see what's going on, but it's going to go a little quick from there. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your attention.
Thank you.
That's amazing. If you would like to turn in your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter number 13. We're going to get there in just a moment. Now, y'all probably didn't know this, but if it's been over 5 years and more than 70% of the congregation doesn't remember, your preachers are allowed to repeat their sermons. Did you know that? That's crazy. That's in the Bible somewhere, I think. But this came up somewhat similar, something around this subject came up came up in the book of Joshua. We're studying our Joshua class, and so I mentioned the sermon, and I know that many of you were not here when the last time I preached it, so maybe this will be. Maybe you will enjoy this, and I think you will enjoy it because I enjoy it. I love this sermon so much. It's such a great sermon. You know why? Because it's not mine. It's not mine. If you have heard of J.W. McGarvey, then you know that which is a very old preacher. He was a great preacher and knew what he was talking about. And there's some things when you read that it is not right for you to not share them. And so here you go. Now, there's a popular thought in the world today, and maybe you would agree with this, that if a person is sincere in their religious beliefs, then what he believes actually doesn't really matter a whole lot. As long as you're sincere, what you believe, it's okay. You just gotta have it in your heart. But when you apply that to any other area of life, that people don't like that. That's not really held to. So let's say a man always flies a certain airline. He loves his airline. Always had a great time on that airline, never had any problems. But in the recent news reports, they're saying that one of their planes have crashed every single day in the past month. Now, no matter how much that man sincerely trusts that airline and its pilots, he is not going to be flying with them the next time he flies. Isn't that right? If it's known that a bank is about to financially collapse, your sincere trust in that bank and its employees, whatever it might be, would not cause you to keep putting your money into that bank, would it? No, it wouldn't. And we could give a whole lot more examples like that because it would be true in every other area of life. So if we are to believe in lies in science, that's going to be a big problem. Lies in the government, that's a problem. In the military, That's a problem. Education, lies in in medicine, and we could go on and on and on. That's a big problem, right? And it has lies in all of those areas, have caused problems and still do. And so don't you think it's weird, don't you think it's odd that a prevailing idea in the world is that when it comes to things that matter to the soul, when it comes to religious things, believing a lie is not really that bad? That's strange. That believing something that is wrong is just as good as believing something that is right. That is the idea in many people's minds today. Now, have you read anything about that in the Bible? And when all the times you've heard preachers speak, and all the times you've been in Bible studies, and all the time you've been in classes and sat at the feet of preachers, have you ever found any scriptures to say anything like that? That as long as you just are sincere about your beliefs, then it doesn't matter if you're wrong. Have you read anything like that in the Bible? Ever? Even in all of our different interpretations on all kinds of different passages and those that exist, we can be confident in saying that nobody of a sound mind now, no one of a sound mind has ever come away from the Bible believing that the Bible actually teaches a person can believe something that is wrong and still be right. It ain't in there. It ain't in there. Over in 2 Thessalonians, put a little marker at 1 Kings 13. 2 Thessalonians, chapter number 2. Among those people in the past who thought, and this is not something new, among those people in the past who thought that, you know what, you could both be wrong and right at the same time. Among those people, Paul was not one of them. Well, let's get to 2 Thessalonians. Well, let me get to it. Verse number 10. All right, can you see it? And it says, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth. They did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now, of course, God, this is not saying that God forces someone to believe something. God forces no one to believe anything at all, whether it be a truth or whether it be a lie. Verse 10 shows us that the people here, what does it say? They chose not to receive that. They refused it, you might see in your translation. They refused to believe it. The truth was given, and they said, no, thank you. We are rejecting that. And of course, the logical consequence of rejecting a truth is to be deceived, and you believe lies. Isn't that right? That makes sense. Now, God, working through his providence, he gives to mankind what he truly seeks. As long as it's right. If truth is what he seeks, then God says he's going to make sure that we find it. That's Matthew 7 in verse number 7. Seek and ye shall find, right? But if somebody does not care about that and they want to live in delusion, they want to live believing lies, well, then God says, okay, you can do that. I'm going to allow you to do that. So be it. And Paul writes in verse number 12 here that they're going to be judged accordingly because that's what they chose. And Jesus taught this same thing in Matthew 15 in verse 14, where he says, let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both are going to fall into the ditch. And so the blind leader, whoever this blind leader is, whoever the blind guide is, will never stop falling into the ditch. Their blindness is the very reason they keep falling, right? And the same thing goes for those who are blind who follow them. And his point was that, that's the physically blind. Just as it is with the physically blind, so it is with the spiritually blind. The ditch represents the spiritual consequences that come from misguidance. And Jesus is saying that is exactly where believing a lie is going to put you, and it is not good. Now, the Old Testament example that teaches this is in 1 Kings chapter number 13. This is, if we just skipped over 13, we read chapter 12, amazing, and then we skip over 13, we get to 14, that's amazing as well. We would even know that there was nothing really taken out of the overall story. We would have never thought anything about it. It doesn't change anything. So, but this is put in here it's got to be put in here for a very specific reason. And surely it has something to do with believing a lie. It's got to. So we're going to try to quickly go through this. By this time in Israel's history, all right, the kingdom of David and Solomon, they had split, all right, into the northern kingdom and into the southern kingdom. Solomon's servant Jeroboam, he was made king over 10 of the tribes. They broke away from David's kingdom, we say, broke away from Judah. And so Jeroboam decided, if his people were going to keep going down to Jerusalem to worship, and that wasn't part of his land, or part of what he was ruling over, because that's where the temple was. If people kept going down there, which was in Judah's land, well, they might be swayed to join Judah, and then they would revolt against him. He could not have that. And so to avoid this, he sets up 2 golden calves as places of worship, one in the very northern part of the land and one in the south of his land. So you had in Dan and Bethel. That's where he sets up these 2 idols. And he says to the people, and you might see it, you don't even have to turn the page, chapter 12 of 1 Kings, in verse 28, he says that if it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem, he's kind of really pushing this, like, it really is, you really shouldn't have to go all the way down there. If it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem, here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. So I've got these guys set up where you don't have to go, it's close enough to you don't have to go down to Jerusalem. And if that wasn't enough, which that wasn't bad enough, he also made new feast days, and he builds these new altars where all these people could come and sacrifice these false gods at, all right? Now, of course, God's not ignoring this. He's watching all of this play out. And in 1 Kings 13:1, he sends a prophet. You see that? He sends a prophet to the city of Bethel, where one of the golden calves are. And this prophet got there just in time to witness King Jeroboam about to burn incense at an altar in worship. So 13, verse number 2, says, then he cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord, this prophet did, and said, O altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David, and on you he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places, who burn incense on you, and men's bones shall be burned on you. Now, quick cut here. King doesn't like that, obviously. He's speaking against what the king's doing. And so he goes to arrest the prophet. Prophet does a miracle and changes the king's mind. King's like, okay, you're the real deal. Why don't you come on into my house? And so now the king is the prophet's best friend. Doesn't want to get harmed, doesn't want to get hurt. So in verse 7, he says, come home with me and refresh yourself, and I will give you a reward. You deserve a reward. Now I want you to put yourself in the prophet's shoes and imagine how surprised you would have been. He's probably going up there thinking, I'm probably not coming home. Probably not going to come home. Expecting to receive nothing from Jeroboam, hatred, persecution, at least get locked up. But here he is being invited to a royal dinner to eat with a king. It's amazing. The food, what kind of food did they have? It would have been awesome. The honor that he would have had among the people, right? Sitting at the king's table. He probably would have, part of him maybe, would have liked to take up the king's offer and go with him and say, yes, I will do this thing. But you see in verse number 8 there, but the man of God said to the king, if you were to give me half your house, I would not go in with you, nor would I eat bread nor drink water in this place. Verse 9, for so it was commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, you shall not eat bread, nor drink water, nor return by the same way you came. Verse 10, so he went another way and did not return by the way he came to Bethel. Now, at this point, isn't this a man to be admired? You got to admire this fellow, right? Defies the power of a king, right? Who is he but a lowly prophet, right? Young fella at that. He resisted this flattering royal invitation, and he's not influenced at all, apparently not influenced at all by all this wealth and this honor that a king could have showered him with. And he rejected all of that. Why? Because he wanted to be obedient to what God had commanded him to do. That's it. That was it. He rejected all of that. He denied all of that so he could be faithful to God. And when you think about how the prophet, maybe he thought, I mean, really nothing. I mean, what really is wrong with just eating a little bit of food, you know? Maybe I'm hungry. Maybe he was hungry. Maybe he was thirsty. And so when you know that, it's just going in there to eat something just so he can have some strength back so he can get back home, then and he rejects it anyways, then maybe we can appreciate him a little more. Maybe he thought, you know what, maybe I could go to the king's house and I could talk to him about what's right, and maybe I could get him back. I could convert him. I could get him back to being faithful to God and get rid of these idols and these altars and things. But he didn't do that. Why? Because he had the command of God clearly embedded in his mind, and he could only do what God said to do. God said, don't you stay there, don't eat, don't drink, don't do anything. You go there and you come home. And so that's what he did. And he didn't waver from it. Wish we had more Christians like that. Chapter number 13, verse 11. Now, in that same city of Bethel was another prophet. He's an older prophet. And there's no reason to think that he was a false prophet. We might call him, let's say, a wayward prophet. Okay? Maybe he was opposed to this false worship that's going on in the city. But, you know, he's old and he's like, I don't really do that anymore. And I kind of retired from the prophecy business, and so he just decided to keep quiet, didn't want to really move, and so he just tried to ride it out there, and just hopefully things work out for the best. But he got wind of what the younger prophet had done, and so he wanted to know where this man was, and it seems that he was glad about it because he finds him, he says, come into my home, finally. You get to thinking, maybe he's thinking, finally someone stood up to Jeroboam. I need to show my respect and my thanksgiving to a fellow prophet of God. And you notice that he gives in verse 11, I believe, the same invitation as the king did. Well, verse 15, look at verse 15. He gave him the same invitation the king did, right? Come home with me and eat bread. See it? And what does the young prophet say? Next verse, I can't do that. The Lord told me what to do, and he told me what not to do. And I cannot stay in this land and eat or drink. Doesn't matter who it's with. Now, what the old man says next has got to be this mixture of eagerness to do good. He just really wants to do good and a sincere heart. But even so, doesn't matter. What he said was a lie. You see verse number 18 there? He said to him, I too am a prophet. Try to picture this now. You're a fly on the wall. I too am a prophet as you are. And an angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord, saying, bring him back with you to your house, that he may eat bread and drink water. And the King James says, but he lied unto him. Oh boy. Well, what happened? The young man believed the lie. Verse 19, so he went back with him, and he ate bread in his house, and he drank water. So this courageous young prophet, who had no fear, who stood his ground against a king with power, and he resisted temptation. And if we hadn't read any of this yet, he was an otherwise model man of God. Now he had been overcome by the plausibility of a lie. And maybe he was thinking, well, wow, so he's a prophet too, huh? And an angel, maybe it's true that an angel did actually speak to him, and angels are of God, and so maybe God did say what this guy is saying. But he believed the lie. And I want you to remember that this young prophet was not a bad man. He was not a bad man. He was not an evil man who fell for a lie. He He was brave, and he was good, and he was true, and he was sincere. Like a lot of people we meet today, and a lot of people we know today. They're good, good people. But if there's anyone today who had a character like this fella right here, all those great, wonderful character traits will not protect them from believing a lie, will it? So in verse 20, they enjoyed their meal, and then God gets involved. Uh-oh. The old prophet received a message from God that just had to be told. So verse 21, and he cried out to the man of God who came from Judah, saying, thus says the Lord. Now he's speaking for God here, the older fellow is. Because you young prophet, have disobeyed the word of the Lord, and have not kept the commandment which the Lord your God commanded you, but you came back, ate bread, drank water in the place which the Lord said to you, eat no bread and drink no water. Your corpse shall not come to the tomb of your fathers. Now that's, at this point, we're like, what? The old prophet says, come on in. Invites him to his home, and then he turns around, puts the food, maybe puts the food all out, and then after blessing the food, perhaps, he pronounces a death sentence upon him. What in the world? But there's no trickery going on here. He spoke for God. The Spirit of God spoke through the old prophet that day, and we can get into a little more of this, but look, when God wants his word to be heard, he makes it happen. And that's what happened here. And so God told the young prophet, basically, he said, you know what? You did everything right, except you disobeyed the one thing I told you not to do. You believed the lie, and it's going to cost you. And it's great. How did that meal taste? What kind of meal did the old prophet make for him? Was it a kingly meal? Probably not. But I bet it was good. As great as that meal may have been, it probably didn't taste very good after that. And so the young man leaves the house, probably wondering what was going to happen to him, and it didn't take long for him to find out. Verse 24, what happens? A lion met him on the road and killed him. Now, I'm not trying to paint this horrible, horrible picture in your mind, but what does that look like to you? What was maybe going through this fellow's mind as, well, I mean, how would you feel if you were being attacked by a big cat like that? The fear and the adrenaline was like coursing through your veins. And what was he thinking about when the lion, as big cats normally do, clamped down his jaws on his neck? Was he thinking about the lion? Or was he thinking about what the old prophet said? And about his sin? And doing what God told him not to do? What do you think people think is worse? Dying in fear and in pain and in agony? Or dying in sin that's going to cost them their soul? What's worse? What's worse? We certainly wish and pray that no one ever has to experience either of those things, but don't you know one of them is worse than the other, right? One of them is worse than the other. Verse 25 and the rest, the old prophet finds out what happens, and he's sorrowful. He can't believe it. They go and find the body, they bury it. Verse 31, the old prophet says, when I'm dead, then bury me in the tomb where the man of God is buried. Lay my bones beside his bones. Wow, that's a nice thought, huh? I mean, this tells us what he thought of the young prophet all along. He did honor him. He did want to respect him. He appreciated his courage for going to the king. And what he says here, wow, what a noble thought this is. But that really wasn't much, considering it was his lie that started it all. But really, what more could he do? The damage had been done. The damage from believing a lie had been done. Now, why is this in here? Why is this in the Bible? Why is this recorded? If not to teach us an example about believing lies. We might think the old prophet, whose sin was greater? The young prophet or the old prophet? who sinned the worst? You know, we might think, you know, the old prophet's sin was greater, you know. Well, old prophet should have died. He should have died. He was the cause of all of this. But you know, it's no mystery that God has always hated lies, and he still hates lies. Lies are the cause of all kinds of trouble in the world, and no person should commit any kind of lie, that kind of sin, with their lips. But the world did not need a lesson about telling a lie. Get that part. The world needed a lesson about believing one. And the young prophet died to teach us that lesson. And we certainly don't think that the old prophet just got away with it, right? We can be sure that his sin found him out soon enough. But here we have a perfect example of what Paul taught in 2 Thessalonians and the teaching of Jesus in Matthew 5 and verse 14 about the blind leading the blind straight into the ditch. There it is. And so now the question that is extremely important to all of us is, how can we be sure that we're not believing lies, especially in religion, especially on spiritual things, especially on things that matter to our soul? How can we be sure, how can I be sure that I'm not being led by blind guides? First, you know, I would like to think that if I was blind myself, I would have enough sense to not let another blind man lead me around. No offense, but I would rather have someone who can see, you know. The only people who are going to lead me, if I was physically blind, was going to be somebody who can actually see where they're going and what they're doing. And so the question is, how am I to figure out, among all the religious people out there who say that they can guide me, as they follow me, we got the truth, how can I be sure that they are the ones that can see, that are right? How do I determine? How do you determine who is blind and who isn't? Well, the answer is that there's only one group of men whom we can absolutely trust without hesitation, and you're going to find all of their words that matter to us in the New Testament. And you're never going to have to wonder, or you're never going to have to question if you can actually trust them or trust Jesus Christ. Their writings are not so many that you can never read them. Matter of fact, we got a little bookmark out there. You can read through the whole New Testament in 30 days. Easy peasy. So we don't have this humongous Bible where there's no way I'm going to get through that in my lifetime. And they're not so few, though, that we can't ever really figure out what's right and what's wrong. No, we got plenty. We got just enough to give us all the answers that we need. Now, yeah, there are going to be some things that are difficult to understand, but if you have a willing heart and a willing mind, never are you going to be in doubt about what is sinful and about what you need to do to have your sins washed away. Now, we go back to that young prophet. He was faced with something that more difficult, that we're never going to experience anything like he did. The lie he believed came from a prophet as coming from God through an angel. Surely he had, as a prophet himself, he had great respect for other prophets, you know, the ones that paved the way before him, and certainly as a man of God, he held the angels as holy beings, right? It was almost as if when he was told this lie, it's almost as if he had to believe it. How could he not? But here's the thing. Although a prophet spoke, and if it were true, if an angel had also said those words, you know what else he knew? That God himself said, don't eat here and don't drink here. And what he should have done was answer that prophet according to that knowledge that he had. Maybe he should have said something like, look, I know that you're a prophet. And I know you say that angels gave you this message to give to me. And I know you're saying that this is from God. And you know what? All that might be true. And maybe it's not. But you know what? Here's one thing I do know, and this is for sure. Maybe he should have said this. He should have said, you know what? God has given me a command. And it really doesn't matter if all the prophets on earth and all the angels in heaven tell me to do something different. I'm just not going to do it. And if he had done that right there, how could he have gone wrong? Would he have been wrong? Absolutely not. If he had just stuck with that, he would not have sinned and he would not have died that day. And look, that, my friends, is the bottom line concerning the faith that is spoken of in the New Testament. Let God be true and every man a liar. Romans 3 and verse number 4. Paul writes, but even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. Galatians 1 and verse 8. And those blind guides that Jesus spoke about, they have been around forever. They've been around since time began. They were there in Jesus' day. They were there in Paul's day. And wouldn't you know it, they are here among us in our so-called mainstream Christianity. They are here today. And I tell you that you would do yourself more than a favor by steering clear of men and women like that. And just keep your mind focused upon the simplicity that is found in the New Testament of Jesus Christ. 2 Corinthians 11 and verse number 3. Now, maybe this is the greatest of all lies that have ever been told. Let's argue about it later. But let's say this is the greatest one that's ever been told, that you got plenty of time to make things right with God. What a lie. What a big fat lie that is. That comes straight from the father of lies, your adversary, the devil. And it tells you to go ahead and keep putting off giving your life to Christ, and go ahead and keep thinking that you're okay and you got time and you can just keep doing what you're doing. This lie tells you you're not really in any danger. It's cool. It's all right. Your life is fine. It could always be worse. Change isn't necessary. But you know what? I mean, if you do think you need to change, it can wait. Just do whatever you got to do first, and you have plenty of time. That's a lie. And accountable men and women are dying lost in sin every day, believing this right here. So it's time to give up, believing that you've got plenty of time left to give your life to Jesus Christ and take up your cross and follow him. I want to encourage you to not let another moment pass by until you have repented of your sins, until you have been buried with your Savior in baptism, Romans 6, 3 and 4. You need to obey the gospel if you haven't done so already. Don't believe a lie. Believe the truth. Believe what the Bible says about it. Now let me encourage you also, if you are a Christian, to quit believing that you've got time to get rid of whatever sin has pulled you away from God, pulled you away from the church. Quit believing that lie, because it could cost you your soul. The invitation is open if you need to respond to it. If you have any need at all, I hope you would come forward and let us know. Let's stand and sing together.